On her wedding day, Emily's loyal German Shepherd Ranger blocked her path to the aisle. The guests fell silent and all eyes turned to the dog who had been her shadow for over a decade. At first she thought it was just his nerves, but the truth she uncovered would forever change what the word love meant to her. Emily froze in her tracks, her ivory gown billowing softly in the breeze as Ranger pressed firmly against her legs. He wasn't barking or growling, just standing there, his amber eyes locked on hers with a silent intensity that sent a chill down her spine. Ranger, come on, buddy, Emily whispered, her voice trembling as she tried to guide him aside, but he wouldn't budge. The murmur of the crowd behind her grew louder. Her father stepped forward, his hand outstretched to tug the leash. Emily, we need to get moving, he said in a hushed tone. The guests are waiting. Ranger growled low and soft, but enough to make even her father hesitate. Emily's heart sank. Ranger never growled, not at her, not at anyone. She knelt down, wedding dress pooling around her like a cloud, and said, Ranger's face in her hands, what's wrong, boy, she murmured, her voice cracking as she stroked the graying fur on his muzzle. That's when she noticed it, the labored rise and fall of his chest, the tremor in his legs. Her breath hitched as a wave of realization swept over her. Something was terribly wrong. Emily, her mother called from the edge of the aisle, her tone edged with impatience. What's happening? We're running out of time. But Emily wasn't listening. Her entire world had shrunk down to the dog who had been by her side through every heartbreak, every triumph, every moment that mattered. She pressed her forehead to his and whispered, I'm here, Ranger, I'm not leaving you. Emily's hands trembled as she gently guided Ranger to sit beside her, his body leaning heavily against her legs. The whispers among the guests grew louder, a low murmur of confusion and curiosity rippling through the crowd, but Emily heard none of it. All she could focus on was the way Ranger's amber eyes seemed to plead with her, as if he were trying to tell her something he couldn't put into words. Ranger, she whispered again, her voice breaking. Her fiancé James Bennett stepped out from the shadows near the altar, concern etched into his face. Emily, is everything okay? He called softly, his calm, steady presence momentarily grounding her. She looked up at him, then back at Ranger, the knot of unease in her chest tightening. Before I take you deeper into this unforgettable moment that changed Emily's life forever, I want to connect with you, my incredible viewers. Have you ever had an animal who seemed to understand your heart better than words ever could? If so, hit that like button and share your story in the comments. And while you're here, tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to see your country's flag in the comments below. Emily's father crouched beside her, his voice low. Emily, we can't delay much longer. The ceremony has to start. She barely registered his words. Her mind raced with memories. Ranger as a scruffy puppy curled up in her lap during a thunderstorm, standing protectively at her side during sleepless nights of heartbreak, and bounding through the park on the day she first met James. Ranger had always been her anchor, her quiet hero, and now, on the most important day of her life, it was clear that something was terribly wrong. Without a second thought, Emily made her decision. We're going to the vet, she said firmly, her voice cutting through the growing murmurs. Her mother gasped audibly. The wedding can wait, she interrupted. Standing and gathering her skirts, she looked up at James, her voice softening. I'm sorry, but I can't leave him like this. James's response was immediate and unwavering. You don't need to apologize. Ranger comes first. The guests watched in stunned silence as Emily, still in her wedding dress, led Ranger toward her car. James followed closely, dialing the emergency vet on his phone, while her father quickly explained the situation to the minister. The quiet hum of voices behind them faded as Emily focused solely on the dog who had given her 13 years of unwavering love. Ranger leaned Against her his breathing shallow but his trust in her absolute as the car pulled away from the venue. Emily felt a mix of fear and determination coursing through her. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain: this day would not go as planned. But then again, the best moments in life rarely do. Would you have made the same choice as Emily? Let me know in the comments below, and stay tuned, because what happens next might just bring tears to your eyes and redefine what true love really means. The car sped toward the veterinary clinic, its quiet hum contrasting sharply with Emily's pounding heart. She sat in the back seat with Ranger cradling his head in her lap, her wedding dress spilled around them like a cloud, the delicate lace now wrinkled and smudged. Ranger's breathing was labored, and every shallow rise and fall of his chest felt like a countdown beside her. James kept glancing at the rearview mirror, his jaw tight with worry. We're almost there, he reassured her, though his knuckles widened as he gripped the steering wheel. Emily nodded, brushing a tear from her cheek as she stroked Ranger graying muzzle. I should have noticed sooner, she whispered, her voice trembling. Ling HK been off all week. I thought it was the wedding chaos, but James's voice was firm but kind. You couldn't have known. What matters is that you're here for him now. The clinic came into view, its small parking lot illuminated by the warm glow of overhead lights. A tall figure stood waiting at the entrance. Dr. Peterson, Ranger's longtime veterinarian. He raised a hand in recognition as they pulled up, quickly stepping forward to help them. Inside, Emily carried Ranger in her arms, her dress dragging behind her as if forgotten. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and soft pine, a strangely comforting mix. Dr. Peterson ushered them into an exam room, his expression calm but serious. Let's take a look at him, he said, gently guiding Ranger onto the padded exam table. Emily stood beside him, her hand never leaving Ranger's side as Jam quietly slipped an arm around her shoulders. Minutes felt like hours as Dr. Peterson worked, his brow furrowed in concentration. Finally, he looked up, his expression one of quiet sympathy. Ranger is in the advanced stages of heart failure, he explained softly. The stress of the day likely exacerbated his symptoms. We can start him on medication to make him more comfortable. But he hesitated, his voice lowering. It's likely we're looking at months, not years. Emily felt the room spin, her breath catching in her throat. She leaned heavily against James, who held her tightly. Is he in pain? She managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. No, Dr. Peterson reassured her, but he's been trying to tell you something was wrong. Dogs are incredibly intuitive, blocking your path. It was his way of asking for help. Tears streamed free down Emily's face as she pressed her forehead to Ranger's, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry, buddy, I'm so sorry. James cleared his throat, his voice steady. What's the next step, Doc? How do we make sure he's comfortable? Dr. Peterson outlined a treatment plan, but Emily's mind was spinning. The wedding, the guests, her parents, it all felt so distant now, irrelevant in the face of what truly mattered. She turned to James, her voice firm despite the tears. I need to stay with him. James nodded without hesitation. Then we stay. Before Emily could respond, the clinic door opened and a familiar voice called out Emily. She turned to see her father stepping into the room, followed closely by her mother, the minister, and even her maid of honor. Sophie, we thought you might need some support, her father said, his eyes softening as they fell on Ranger. Her mother, usually so composed, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Sophie stepped forward, holding up her phone. The guests are fine, we explained. There was a family emergency and everyone understands, but we were thinking maybe we don't have to cancel the wedding. Emily blinked, confused. What do you mean? The minister smiled gently. If you're up for it, we can do it here right now with Ranger. Her heart clenched at the thought, her dropping to the dog who had been by her side through everything she looked at James searching his face. He met her eyes with a small smile. "It's not the wedding we planned," he said, "but it's the one that feels right." Emily let out a soft, tearful laugh, nodding. "Leighton do it." In the next hour, the clinic transformed into an impromptu wedding venue. Sophie adjusted Emily's dress as best she could, smoothing out wrinkles of pinning her veil back into place. James straightened his tie, his tuxedo slightly rumpled but still perfect in her eyes. The minister stood in the center of the room, and Ranger lay at their feet, his tail wagging faintly as if he understood. As Emily and James exchanged vows, their hands intertwined, she felt a warmth she hadn't expected, a deep, unshakable certainty. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ranger let out a quiet approving wolf, drawing laughter and tears from everyone present. That night, instead of a grand reception, Emily and James sat on the floor of their apartment, still in their wedding clothes. Ranger lay between them, his head resting on Emily's lap as they shared take-out Chinese food. Each bite felt like a celebration, not of the day's chaos, but of its clarity, of what truly mattered. James looked over at Emily, his eyes filled with admiration. "You know," he said, "this wasn't the perfect wedding, but it was perfect for us." Emily smiled, leaning into him as she stroked Ranger's fur. "Because of him," she said softly, "he reminded us what love really means." "Would you have stayed by your loyal companion's side on your wedding day?" Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit like and subscribe, because sometimes life's most beautiful moments come wrapped in the unexpected. The months that followed their unconventional wedding were a bit of sweet mix of joy and heartache. Ranger's treatment helped him regain some strength, and on good days he was almost his old self, eager to follow Emily around the house, wagging his tail when James came home, and even enjoying short walks at the park where Emily and James had first met. But there were harder days too, when the weight of his illness was undeniable. Through it all, Emily and James adjusted their lives around Ranger, cherishing every moment they had left with him. One crisp winter evening, Emily sat on the living room floor, her back resting against the couch, while Ranger lay beside her with his head in her lap. James was in the kitchen, humming softly as he prepared dinner. The Christmas tree glowed softly in the corner, its twinkling lights casting a warm comfort in glow across the room. Emily ran her fingers gently through Ranger's fur, her heart swelling with gratitude and sadness all at once. She whispered, "You've been the best boy, Ranger, the very best." James stepped into the room carrying 2 steaming mugs of cocoa. "How's he doing?" he asked, sitting down beside her. Emily smiled faintly. "Hugh's tired, but he's still here. That's what matters." James nodded, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "He's a fighter just like you." The weeks passed, and Ranger's good days became fewer. On a soft spring morning he let them know it was time. Emily and James spent the day with him, sitting in their backyard under the blossoming trees. They fed him his favorite treats, whispered words of love, and held him close as he drifted peacefully into his final sleep. That evening the house felt unbearably quiet without strangers' presence. Emily sat at the kitchen table, staring at his empty bed by the fireplace. James placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice gentle. "You gave him a life full of love, Emily. He knew how much he meant to you." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "He taught me so much about loyalty, about love. I miss him so much." In the weeks that followed, Emily and James honored Ranger's memory by reflecting on the lessons he had taught them. One afternoon, as they sorted through old photos, Emily paused on one taken during their wedding at the clinic. It showed them exchanging vows, but their eyes weren't on each other. They were both looking at Ranger, who lay at their feet, watching them with quiet devotion do you think he knew? Emily asked softly. James nodded. He knew exactly what he was doing that day. He reminded us what mattered most months. Later Emily and James returned to the same shelter where she had first found Ranger. It was a quiet, rainy afternoon, and the shelter buzzed with the sound of dogs barking and the soft chatter of staff. Emily walked slowly past the kennels, her heart aching with familiar longing. At the end of the row, a senior golden retriever named Milo lay quietly on a worn blanket, his graying muzzle resting on his paws. His eyes met Emily's, and in that instant she felt the same unexplainable connection she had felt with Ranger years ago. This is him, she whispered, tears filling her eyes. He's the one. James knelt beside her, scratching Milo gently behind the ears. Welcome to the family, buddy. That night Milo curled up in Ranger's old bed by the fireplace, as though he knew it was a sacred space. Emily sat beside him, her heart full of hope. We're going to give you the best life, Milo, she promised softly, because love like Ranger's deserves to be shared. Through Milo they found healing laughter and a new sense of purpose, and every year on their wedding anniversary Emily and James visited the shelter, bringing donations and spending time with the older dogs who often went unnoticed. It was their way of honoring Ranger's legacy, a testament to the love that had changed their lives forever, because Ranger had shown them that love isn't about how much time you have, it's about how deeply you live it. And as Milo slept peacefully by their side, they knew that Ranger's greatest gift was teaching them that the heart always has room to love again.